But let's go to my next guest, who's Headline Advisory Director and, of course, former Press Secretary to Scott Morrison, Andrew Carswell. We're going to talk all about, of course, the Liberal Party, where to from here. They've got a new leader, Susan Lee. For the first time, it's a woman. We're also talking a lot as well about what went wrong in the election. You know, there's a thing about, well, I guess, good campaigns and bad campaigns. Is that fair enough to say, Andrew? And what'd you make of, I guess, part of the wash-up, we're looking at policy, the campaign itself, and there has to be an element of Peter Dutton and a discussion on him as leader. I know you don't have to be popular, but I guess they're the big three things. What were the factors? What would you change? What can you change?
Yeah, and I think what you saw from Susan Lee straight up was the right posture and tone to approach this task. It is a conversation now with not only her party room and the coalition, but the Australian public. The Australian public got up and walked away from the coalition. So that is the posture that needs to be taken for Susan, and she's already started on that front foot by having a listening approach to try and understand where they got it so badly wrong and how they can connect with real Australians.
And one of the things to me that stood out was how much policy was not settled, not even a few months out, but even by the campaign, that part of the gas detailed policy was so late. She says, put everything on the table. Is the key to sorting that out much earlier, that details in campaign just become so messy that has to be a lot earlier, and that whilst you say the campaign itself didn't go well, it's a bit like if you miss 2 months of the pre-season and the footy season, it's not that you weren't playing well in the first month, it's you missed the pre-season. It's the preparation that ruins the campaign.
That's right. And I think we don't need to hear from the coalition on what they propose on policy in the next 6 months. The public does not want to hear from them at all in this regard. So now is the time to actually put the infrastructure in place on policy within the shadow cabinet, within the joint party room and the individual party rooms to ensure that those conversations are taking place, to ensure that policy development is starting, and ensure that everyone is heard in that debate as well. In the last opposition, we didn't have that kind of clear infrastructure in place to allow policy development to take place. And I think, under the Dutton regime, policy implementation was put on the back burner. It was put on the back burner because he wanted to keep the parties together. And how do you keep the parties together? You don't talk about policy. So policy development was not valued. And when it came to the crunch, where they started to lose votes in the lead up to the campaign, in the lead up to the election campaign, they suddenly realised they needed to have some policies, a vision for the future to put forward. And so they rushed it. They were poorly explaining it. And it was the proof is in the pudding.
And I guess the early part of the term from Peter Dutton, it's easy to forget, he made some good decisions. He weren't early on the Voice referendum, and it was quite popular when he said he would oppose it. That obviously was a huge part. I mean, the political momentum that Anthony Albanese lost in that first term was astonishing. Even just the 3 or 4 months before the Voice up to the result, his personal popularity, the primary of Labor. So that you could do that all over again if you get the right things to campaign against, whether it be, last time it was inflation and the Voice. This time we'll see. There's still tough things for Labor to govern with. So you can do that, but then it's the pivot from there to having that policy and rolling that out, I suppose. So the opposition part, the making the case for the no, was done pretty well, you'd have to say, by Peter Dutton.
Correct.
It's the yes case, not for the rest of referendum, but the yes case for him that didn't sort of follow.
Well, what the coalition didn't do very well was explain what they are for. We heard a lot from the coalition what they were against. And I think in the wash-up from the referendum, that should have been the moment to sit down and go, what is our vision for this country? How can we explain it best to the Australian public? And how can we align policy to our values? And that's what went wrong, particularly on economic policy. Now, post-COVID, Australians have, shunted a little bit to the left in terms of they used to value personal responsibility and personal aspiration. But they shunted that aside and chased after what they could get from government. And that's a wash-up from COVID that carried on through cost of living. But the problem with the coalition is that they chased Australians down the rabbit hole instead of standing firm on their values in terms of their classical...
So unprecedented spend, JobKeeper, for example, all that spending, you're saying that voters said, well, free money's great. The difficult choice And maybe it's easier to say in hindsight. The difficult choice was to say, we're not going down into a bidding war on cost of living. You know, we're not comparing small tax cuts or say have a fuel excise cut. But there could have been votes in actually having principle and I suppose liberal values, retaining them over, we'll give you some goodies too.
That's right. And Australians were put on the teat of government compensation through COVID and they were never taken off. So instead of designing policy to entice Australians back to more conservative economic policy, they chased them to the left. And the policies that were put forward were arguably, from the coalition point of view, the most left-wing economic policies that we've seen since Malcolm Fraser. That's a big effort. And this is the other big effort. I mean, ironically, they chose populism, yet became less popular.
Yeah, it's quite something to come back from, isn't it? All right, Andrew, well, we're still sifting through the wreckage. Appreciate your time today.